Ghost of the Alton Penitentiary. One of the darkest periods in the history of Alton occurred during the years of the Civil War, when the town became a military post thanks to its location on the Missouri border and its access to the river. It was during this period that Alton's Penitentiary, the first in the state of Illinois, was turned into a prison for Confederate soldiers, leading to death, a terrible epidemic, and a relentless haunting. Construction had been completed on the penitentiary in Alton in 1833. Conditions were grim from the beginning, and the prison became known as a horrific place plagued by rats, vermin, and disease. There was always a lack of clean clothing, fresh water, edible food, and medical care, and according to records, many of the men who served time here died within a few months of their release. Their health had simply been broken by the conditions of the prison. By the 1850s, things were so bad that Dorothea Dix, a social reformer and leader in the movement to improve conditions for prisoners, the insane, and the mentally ill, led a crusade to stop the Alton prison from being used. Her reports about the place led to a heated controversy that eventually ended in a legislative investigation and the construction of a new prison near Joliet. It was completed in 1859, and prisoners from Alton were soon transferred there. By 1860, the Alton Penitentiary was abandoned. In 1862, it had become apparent that the war was not going to come to a swift end, and more space is needed for the growing numbers of Confederate prisoners of war. Permission was granted to Union commanders to take over the empty Alton Penitentiary for use as a military prison. Within 3 days of the arrival of the first prisoners, the penitentiary was already overcrowded. The maximum capacity of the institution was estimated at 800, but throughout most of the war, it held between 1,000 and 1,500 prisoners, and often more, sometimes as many as 5,000. Most of the prisoners remained in their cells or had limited access to the yard where the drinking water and the latrines could be found. The prison had no water supply. A well was located on the grounds, but soon after the prisoners of war were transferred there, the water was found to be contaminated. The situation was remedied by hauling huge water kegs from the river using a 6-mule team wagon. The drinking water was stored in a trench just a short distance away from a similar container that was used as a latrine. Wood-burning stoves that had been set up in the corridor supplied heat to the prison. As the war continued, new prisoners arrived in Alton on a regular basis. Living conditions in the prison were unbearable. Most of the men were badly clothed, food was often withheld as a punishment or was not edible when it was given. Bathing facilities were not available, and gnats, lice, flies, and other vermin were common. The prevailing diseases at the Alton prison included malaria, pneumonia, dysentery, scurvy, and anemia. These diseases felled more men than gunshots ever could. Then, in 1863, several isolated cases of smallpox broke out among the prisoners. The disease began to spread and quickly turned into an epidemic. At the time of the outbreak, the prison population numbered almost 2,000 in quarters that were designed for many less. The men slept 3 in a bed, 8 standing up, in a common, unshaved and used a common latrine. Nothing was clean in the prison, and the men were often unshaved and filthy. The sleeping mattresses were never changed or washed, and the prison yard was filled with pools of stagnant water and urine. Smallpox swept to the penitentiary, and soon both prisoners and guards began to die. Before it was over, the disease also spread into the city of Alton itself, killing many residents. In the early days of the epidemic, as the prison death toll first began to climb, Alton's mayor, Edward T. Drummond, refused to have any of the prisoners treated away from the prison. There were no hospitals in the city of Alton in those days. The patients were quartered in hallways, storage rooms, and stables as the prison hospital. There was woefully inadequate with only 5 beds. Before the outbreak, there had been about half dozen deaths per week. in this prison in the prison, but soon they were counting more than 5 a day. Once the disease started to spread, there was no way to stop it. The men were weakened by poor diets and filthy living conditions and were helpless against the disease. The sick and dying men were overflowing from the converted hospitals and sick rooms, and there had become a dire situation over what to do with the bodies of the dead. The prison dead house was simply a shed and a yard where bodies were kept until they could be buried, but it was a soon overflowing of corpses. The people all began to panic and demanded that the sick and the dead had to be taken somewhere outside of the city limits. The sick were subsequently taken to a small island on the Missouri called Sunflower Island. Located on one end of the island was a dilapidated summer cottage, which was commandeered and turned into a hospital pest house. Prisoners, guards, and doctors feared going to the island, afraid they would never return. Prisoners and guards also transported wrapped bodies to the island where they were placed in trenches. The smallpox epidemic continued to rage at the prison through the winter of 1863 and into the following spring. In the summer of 1864, a group of St. Louis nuns from the Daughters of Charity arrived at the prison. They demanded better medical supplies, an actual hospital building, and permission to conduct burial services for the men. The new hospital was authorized for the grounds, and construction was completed by that autumn. By the end of the new summer, new cases of smallpox were no longer reported, and the pest house on Sunflower Island was closed down. Those who were buried there remain unknown today, and their graves have vanished due to flooding along the Mississippi River. Some believe that the Alton residents shunned the island because of the chance that traces of smallpox might linger there. Others believe that it was avoided for another reason altogether, because of the ghosts of the men buried there and unmarked graves still roamed around the island. The Alton Penitentiary was abandoned after the war. The walls around the prison yard were torn down between 1870 and 1875, and most of the stone was hauled off for road construction projects. The area where the prison yard is located was turned into a public park. Some of the walls of the old prison remained standing for years, but by the 1940s, only scattered ruins remained. The last section was finally moved in 1973 and reconstructed nearly as a monument to the past. The area where the prison was located is now a public parking lot. Today, only the small portion of the wall remains on the site of the penitentiary, where visitors can find historical information and displays about the prison and the Civil War. As the years have passed, the old Alton Penitentiary has become the source of a number of ghostly legends around the town. For years, the historic site and the surrounding area has been the scene of ghostly reports. Many of the tales date back even farther than recent times. In the days of the war, the old prison building remained on the back of the lot, slowly crumbling into the root. In the days after the war, the old prison building remained on the back of the lot, slowly crumbling into ruin. The temptation of the old prison proved too much for most visitors to resist, and many of them explored the empty corridors, abandoned cells, and deserted staircases. These visitors soon learned, however, that the former prison was not as empty as they first believed. Tales began to filter out of the prison about ghostly voices, strange sounds, screams, cries, eerie weeping, and moaning that came from places where no living person could be found. The disturbing tales continued for decades, even up until the time that the remainder of the prison was finally demolished. In addition to the sounds, people also spoke of seeing spectral images of former prisoners still wandering about on the property. These figures had the chilling habit of vanishing without a trace when approached or confronted. They would be there one moment and gone the next. Turning the old prison into a parking lot seemed to have little effect on them. Even in recent years, passersby have claimed to see the apparitions of men and soldiers still lingering on this ground. They are usually described as being very ragged, and when they appear, and they will appear and vanish without warning. Are these strange visions truly the lost souls of the soldiers who suffered and died here in the past, or are they merely a small piece of time that has been left behind on the atmosphere of this place? We may never know, but the ghost serves a record of the horror and tragedy that occurred here during some of America's darkest days.